welcome to National Fossil Day during Earth Science Week. My name is Dr. Sharon Weaver, and this here is Seth Vandenberg.
Hello.
I am curator here at the Mammoth Site in Hot Springs, South Dakota, and the National Speleological Society director, one of the directors, and Seth here is the Mammoth Site science educator. And today we want to kind of talk to you a little bit about caves and paleontology.
Absolutely. So before I started here at the Mammoth Site, I wasn't really familiar with all the ways that caves are super important to preserving fossils and for our understanding of paleontology. So what are some of the ways that caves kind of help preserve fossils better than some other areas?
Well, caves are really good because they're natural environments that kind of help preserve fossils long term and act kind of like snapshots in time. So it's like basically every layer of sediment that you can find in a cave could potentially have fossils in it. And as you dig down those layers, most likely those fossils get older and older. And so here in the Black Hills, we have over 400 caves. And a lot of those caves preserve many different fossils. And so they kind of help tell us a little bit about the environment of the region by showing us what kind of plants and animals used to live here during those times.
So when we find fossils in caves, are they always going to be the really, really small stuff, or do we ever find bigger animals in caves?
You can find both. It really just depends on the cave environment itself. And you may not even find animals. You can find animal remains, other types of remains. You want to talk about one of our unique remains?
Absolutely.
Here?
So this is one that we use for one of our Rove cards, and this is actually a sample of sloth dung, but also it's pack rat dung, which pack rats are a small rodent animal, and what's really neat about them is that they kind of just collect all this stuff and kind of bring it into what they call their midden. And so when we find the remains of those, we find all kinds of stuff, and a lot of times we find bits of grass, basically some bones, some other animal dung sometimes. Basically it's just kind of a collection of everything that was in that pack rat's area.
Yeah, they're kind of like hoarders. They really like all kinds of different stuff. They'll collect plants and, like you said, bones and even dung in certain cases. And what they do is their midden is actually just like a big pile of their dung and pee. And what's really neat is that you can kind of get an age for how old a pack rat midden is based on how strong it smells, which is kind of funny. But those pack rat middens are treasure troves of information. So in this bag here, I have the remains of a pack rat midden, okay? And there's all kinds of dung and little bits of things. And what we'll do is we'll go through it, and sometimes we'll screen wash it, depends on what condition that midden's in. And we'll look for those tiny bits of information, Seth, just like we were talking about. In this jar, we have jaws, we have different kinds of plant materials. You can see what kind of pine trees were around here. We have teeth and all kinds of really cool information. Did you know in the Southwest, there are caves that are full of sloth dung or even mammoth dung?
So my question is, when we find one of those caves, like when I think of a cave, I usually think of, trying to crawling on your hands and knees, pretty small areas. How does the droppings of such big animals like that get into those areas?
Well, it really, again, depends on the kind of cave. So in the Southwest, we have some really large open caves where these animals may have been using them as outhouses. And so mammoths would go in, do their business, and leave, but the environment is so dry, it kind of just preserves that dung. And what I've been told is that it still smells kind of like an outhouse today, as you would expect, which is really cool and neat. But in other caves, in wetter caves, sometimes that sediment kind of builds up over time, and so it becomes this really tight little area that you have to dig through to kind of get at the fossils. And you know what? A lot of people don't even realize when they're crawling through caves that they're crawling right over bones.
Absolutely. So when we look at some of these fossils, so we talked about sometimes the open caves. Do we ever find evidence of animals bringing, basically taking the remains for, say, like an animal is killed and bringing it back into a cave?
Oh, definitely. So we get a lot of predators that will bring animals and things into the cave to munch on later, and we can see the evidence of them chewing on that prey, on the bones, which is really cool, even from thousands of years ago. Not only the large stuff like cats, large cats, or even coyotes or canids, but you can also get rodents that will chew on bones. And so you can see the evidence on the fossils of rodent gnaw marks right directly on the bones. Isn't that cool?
Absolutely. So when a rodent gnaws on the bones, it's to get at the calcium and the minerals in there, correct?
Yeah, that helps supplement their diet and helps keep them healthy. Which is really cool. You see a lot of different animals that will chew on bones. Even in cases, sometimes deer are been known to chew on bones, which is kind of cool because they're just, you know, grass eaters, plant eaters. But we can also get large animals that may have fallen into a cave. Let's say there's a large opening and the animal is running along, they might fall into that opening and get trapped. And we call those natural traps.
Absolutely, and those are really cool because then we can kind of see over time as they fall through, kind of the same method that we see, like, you know, the buried layers, but in this case, it's, you know, you might get that bigger animal that, you know, wasn't necessarily from that original event.
Very true. So, and sometimes those openings will allow other animal bones maybe to be washed in during a big storm. It really depends on the environment and what kind of cave you're looking at. So one of our local caves at Wayne Cave National Park is called Persistence Cave. I'm going to swing over here. Persistence Cave has an opening where you go down about 8 feet and then it splits off in a couple different directions. But in that cave, we find the remains of all different kinds of animals. We find rattlesnakes, black bears, of course bats, and that cool little pack rat we were talking about that makes those middens. But we also find animals that we don't see here today anymore. We find pika, which is a little guy that lives in alpine.
Closely related to rabbits, right?
Yeah, more closely related to rabbits than they are to mice, let's say. We also find extinct peccaries, and we find camels, which is really cool. So I have a couple camel bones that we have found at Persistence Cave. Now, these aren't the real ones, Seth.
So they're very lightweight compared to what I would expect.
Yeah, so what we did is we 3D scanned them and then 3D printed them. And this creates a sample that we can show kids and people, and they can touch and hold it and not worry about breaking the bone if they were to drop it, which is really cool. So this is from a large camel, and then we have like a llama-sized camel bone here. But even that one, you can see some gnaw marks on it too, even on the 3D print, which is really neat.
Absolutely, and camels are a really cool one because, like, when we think of mammoths and some of these animals, we very clearly we don't see mammoths alive anymore today, but we still have camels. But what's really neat is we don't have camels in the Black Hills anymore today, but we know they were here at one point.
Most definitely. Yeah, we even find camel bones here at the mammoth site, which is really cool. So, but I mean, like I said, you get all these different kinds of animals, and sometimes you just find isolated bones. A lot of times you just find broken pieces of bones. But in some cases, you find entire skeletons of animals. So in this tray, we have an entire skeleton, and this skeleton was recently found in a local cave here in the Black Hills. This one, I think, is going to be a type of weasel, so it's something that we're still researching today. But we don't know quite how old it is yet. So one of the things, Seth, that we're going to do is we're going to take a sample of one of these bones and send it off to a lab to give us a date. What's really cool is this was found really deep in a cave, so it was pretty far in, so it had to have taken either a very long trip in the dark, which is highly unlikely, or there used to be an old entrance that's now covered, which is really cool. So one of the really unique things about that skeleton I was just showing you is that it was covered in all of this kind of brownish black stuff. Seth, do you have a guess of what you think that might be?
Ooh, if it was covered with it, my guess is it might be, could it be the remains of some of the softer tissues of the animal?
See, and that's what I thought at first too. I mean, if you look at it under a microscope, you might see little bits of hair, but all of these little brown specks are little balls with holes in them. And what they actually are Dermestid beetle eggs. So when this animal died, its body was eaten by all these beetles, and they laid all kinds of eggs. So those eggs hatched and continued to feast on the skeleton, just leaving this brown black matter all across the skeleton, which is super cool and really unique, because some of the other bones that I have looked at in this cave don't have that. They're more in a muddy area versus a rocky area, so we don't see those Dermestid beetle eggs.
So we can even see some of the taphonomic processes as they vary, not only at a hole, but like within the cave itself.
That's right, which is super cool.
So when I heard the Dermestid beetles, I've heard that before. We use those today to clean modern specimens, correct?
We do. So today to get to a skeleton that we can use to compare to other fossil skeletons and stuff, we need to clean all the flesh off of them. And one of the best ways to do that is to use these type of beetles, these Dermestid beetles, to eat that flesh away and leave the bones behind. So we're using like real world evidence in our own labs to make sure that we have something that we can work with and study from, which is super cool.
And it's also cool because then we can see that same process. Not only are we using the process that the animal would naturally do, but it's something that's been doing for thousands of years, and we're basically just being like, oh, let's use that, let's use that to help advance the science as well.
That's right. Dermestids are fun little beetles. I've used them a lot in different labs. They're very particular actually on what they eat. They like to have more of a jerky status, but they're fun, unique things, and to find something like this, I think is really cool. But because not every time you find bones like that, sometimes they're drier stuff, sometimes they're more in mud, and it may be that we find that dating the Dermestid beetle eggs are going to give us more information than dating the bones directly, which is also kind of cool.
Absolutely. So we've been talking about how caves are really good at preserving fossils, and compared to some other areas where they might start to crumble away. What are some of the preservation and preparation challenges when you're dealing with removing a fossil from a cave?
Oh, there is so many, and like I said, everything depends on what kind of cave you're in. The challenge with that weasel that we were just talking about, it was so far into the cave, and you had to go through a crawling passage that was pretty tight and narrow and very far. So I think we crawled almost 3/4 of a mile in through water and muck, and what we don't want to do is crush the bones in that case. So we had to have a way of transporting it out where it was going to be stable enough. Other tricky aspects to it is that it was kind of a wetter cave for our area, and so preserving them and bringing in consolidants and making sure that those don't crumble when you touch them is also a tricky thing. But no, some caves are a little bit drier and the bones are better preserved, and so they just come out in one whole piece, and we don't have to worry about them crumbling or anything like that. So it just really depends on where you are, but I mean, tricky things is getting them out safely, making sure they're staying in place, and making sure you have the information available, and making sure the professionals, the scientists, know what's going on. Typically, if you come across a bone in a cave or fossils in a cave, it's always best to take pictures and let the scientists know. Hey, we have this, what do you think? Is this important? Should we do more research on it?
Absolutely. Not only just a picture, but a picture with scale, I assume, would be even more valuable.
Exactly. So if you have a ruler, if you have a pen, if you have a penny, anything where we know what size you're looking at, it will really help us with trying to help you figure out, is this important?
And as you've mentioned a couple of times with some of these specimens, you've mentioned their location within the cave. So we've talked about, you think about with paleontology, the location of the fossils is extremely important. And so some people might think, oh, well, if it's in the cave, it's in the cave. But that positioning is going to be extremely important.
It's very important. And even what depth, like how far below the surface layer you are, is also super important. But make sure the professionals know. Don't be the one to take it out yourself, because you might lose some of that important information.
Absolutely. It's one of the really cool things that especially when you think about caving, they often seem like they're caving and paleontology are going to be separate, but it's one of those really cool ways that science is almost always interconnected with each other, whether that's, talking about the preservatives we need in the chemistry that has to be at play, or the chemistry of the cave itself, or, just even how to safely navigate a cave is going to be an important part of it.
Right. That's the beauty of science, right? Especially for this week, is knowing that everything kind of has a connection to something else. So if you're interested in more than one subject, there's probably a way that you can do both.
Absolutely.
Super cool. Well, we want to thank you guys for listening to us talk about cave and paleontology. If you guys would like to have more information about it, please visit the NSS website or the Mammoth-Site's website at mammothsite.org. Feel free to look us up and send us an email too if you need, and we'll be talking to you next time. Thank you.